All right, everybody. Well, we got through the tough stuff. We got through the organizational intelligence and data and all of that. And I know it's not sometimes the most exciting topic, but which is part of the reason it doesn't get as much attention. But I hope that you're able to use what we talked about this morning and just bring it in and leverage it to your success as much as possible in all the different ways that we talked about today. And this afternoon is we're kind of going to bring it up a level and look at an overview to kind of give us the space to consider what are the factors that make a successful organization. And you know, all of you probably know this already. And so often I find when I go to a conference, seminar, workshop, the things that I'm learning are not brand new necessarily, but I think somebody mentioned it this morning. Sometimes it's a reminder of things we already knew but we may have forgotten, or it's presented in a different way so we understand it differently or expand our understanding of something. So we're going to kind of discover this together, and I'm going to use a model this afternoon to base a lot of our discussion that I gave you a sneak preview of this morning. For those who are here. But we're going to spend a lot of time on that, and I'll give you some more information on that shortly. So let me see. Organizational effectiveness. Let's, hopefully you have all your handouts, right? So you have them handy. And we're done with intros, so let's go right over to before we do our overview, I wanted to give you this quote to ponder for a moment. Because this, to me, is the why we're even talking about this. Has anyone seen this before?
Yep.
No of you? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Some of you probably know the answer to this question. Some of you may still be discovering or even rediscovering your answer to this question, which is just how life goes. And I think we're really blessed when we discover this. And again, it might be more than one discovery through our lifetime. But my point is, when you discover what it is you're passionate about and want to do it in the best possible way, that's where what we're going to talk about is going to help move you forward. I'm sure you're already passionate about doing what you're doing, serving the organization or organizations that you are serving and the causes that you are serving. But we're going to talk about, again, step back and kind of look globally at what those factors are and get you thinking about what might be most important for you to start thinking about, looking at, improving in your organization so you can do this better, do your passion better. When I teach strategic planning, I've added a little piece to my class. And if you were in my class last year, you might remember I showed a picture of a shrimp. And I said, this captures the essence of strategic planning. And of course, people looked at me like I was crazy, but does anybody remember that, or does anybody know why that might be the case? It's a special fact about the shrimp's anatomy. The shrimp's heart is in its head. All right, and we as nonprofit employees, board members, leaders, or supporters passionate about nonprofits have a really difficult role because we're so passionate. We know what kind of impact we want to be making. But we also have to bring in that business process piece and that head. It's not that we run everything from our hearts, but we combine those two. For-profits, business profit, business process, strongly driven there. But we're combining both. And when you do that effectively, it's a beautiful thing. So we're going to talk today about how you can do that better from this global sense. And the model that we're going to work from is something that should be pretty easy for you to kind of wrap your hands around, even though it covers a lot. So let's go ahead and get started. Three main areas that I thought we could talk about as we evolve through this conversation. First, defining organizational effectiveness, so we're talking about the same thing. Then we're going to reflect on on organizational effectiveness in our context. And again, choose whichever context makes sense for you, whether it's your board position, who you work for, who you imagine yourself working for, who you've worked for in the past, whatever you think is relevant. We're going to reflect on some things. We're going to have the opportunity to assess where we're strong and maybe not so strong in our organizations, and then plan for progress and success. And I specifically use the word progress in there and success because I think it's really important for us to be continually valuing, reinforcing, and celebrating our progress, and not just our outcomes, but the progress we're making towards them. So, all right, my intentions is that we be present. I know it's Friday afternoon after lunch, so be as present as we can. Again, if we can just silence our phones, which you probably already still have them silenced. Be open and participate actively, much like many of you did this morning, and thank you for that. So let's do a little quick exercise to kind of refresh us after lunch and to reinforce number 2 up there, being open. So I'd like you all, what we're going to do, I'll describe it and then we'll do it together. What I'd like you to do is just look down at your paper. You're going to look down and focus really hard on what's on your paper, and then I'm going to ask you to raise your gaze and open it as wide as you can, and then just kind of watch what happens. Okay? Let's do this. So look down, focus on your paper in front of you. Then I want you to raise your gaze and open it as wide as you can. What happens when you do that? You breathe more, yes. You spontaneously take a breath. What's that? You look around. Yes, your perspective changes, it opens and broadens. So we've probably all been here for most of the week. And now is our time as we end our week and talk about this open to new ideas, perspectives, exploring things that you probably don't have time to explore and think about on a daily basis to the extent that we're going to today. So again, that's why we're making the space to do that today. All right, so there we go. So defining organizational effectiveness, what are we talking about? First, I'm going to share this with you to set the stage, and this is a quote that I use with almost every client engagement, because I want people to be thinking this way when they're thinking about what's possible for their organization. The greater danger from us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. Now, as nonprofits, with the passion that I'm assuming we're bringing to our work, this is usually not a problem. However, sometimes we hold ourselves back, and we talked about that a little this morning as well. This is the kind of thinking I want you to go forth with. When you do your strategic plan, this is the kind of thinking everyone needs to have in their vision, that vision they set. Because if you think this way, it is possible. It is not just me making this up. I've been doing this work for 17 years, the actual strategic planning work, and I always encourage people to think this way. And they think, wow, it's kind of scary, right? But what about this, and what about that, and what about all the organizational intelligence and what that's telling us, and all the fears and threats and all of that? But what we find that this kind of research opens up possibilities. This frame of mind opens up possibilities that otherwise would not be there, and it's achievable. It's kind of like aiming up here. And even if you just get here, that's pretty exciting, because aiming here and getting here is not quite as fulfilling. So anyway, some things for you to think about and hopefully inspire you as we start our discussion today. All right, so here's our definition, organizational effectiveness. It is to me, this is how I'd like to use this today. Again, the term organizational intelligence this morning, we defined that and used it in a very specific way as well. Organizational effectiveness is a continuous process of optimizing internal functioning and external impact. All right? We need both of those together. And in order to create organizational effectiveness, we use organizational development. So the field of OD, or organizational development, which is basically, I really like this definition. I can't remember where it came from. It's not really my words. I think it's me paraphrasing or pulling this from somewhere, but I don't remember. It's been a long time. But I like to describe it as a deliberately planned effort to increase an organization's relevance and viability. So figuring out continuously what the needs are, how we're going to meet them, and how we're going to be sustainable, financially, human resource-wise, whatever the case may be. So just a couple things to think about. So the model that we'll be looking at today is a model that describes the elements necessary to be effective as an organization, and organizational development is many different processes or things that you can do to make that happen. Okay? There we go. We've got the dry definition out there. Now, before we talk about the model, because we'll spend most of our time talking about that, what I want to do is to have you pair up and do a little exercise where you're going to discover through your own experiences what were some of the most significant things you think contribute to organizational effectiveness. So from your experience. So hopefully you picked up something that looks like this on the table. It's called Interview on the top. No? Isn't that over there? Oh, that's right, you didn't, because I didn't want you to look at it before I got here. I was hiding it. Of course you didn't. So now I will pass it out, and now you will see what I'm talking about. That was a test. Just kidding. All right. Would you pass these down, please? Thank you. I try to be funny. Oh, get a couple more for back here. All right. So has anyone heard of the field of appreciative inquiry before? AI or appreciative inquiry? This morning, yeah. We need a couple more over here, and then a couple for the back table. So if you've never heard of it before, I encourage you to check it out and just get some understanding about what it's all about, because it's pretty exciting stuff, pretty exciting research. I was first exposed to it about 20 years ago. There you go. You're welcome. Yeah, we have enough. And it really speaks to kind of that Michelangelo quote, actually, and what we're going to do in this interview as well. We need two more. Are there any extras anywhere?
We're from the same organization.
I made more than we expected today, but sorry about that. So, no, I don't need it. No, I don't need it. I'll just look at someone else's. Thank you. All right, so appreciative inquiry, and we talked about Michelangelo, and it's kind of about stretching that positive thinking without any limits. And pure appreciative inquiry is about not looking at any barriers. All right? They probably don't even really want to look at organizational intelligence. And I don't adopt it to that purest sense, because I think it's still good to be grounded in the realities that we're facing at some point. But anyways, appreciative inquiry also speaks to the fact that if we can tap into times that were particularly successful and powerful and positive in our history and our background, we can revitalize our own motivations and really discover the things that are most important for us personally and for our organizations. So that's kind of a summary, a broad overview. So this interview form, I'm going to ask you to interview one another and just kind of think about, I'm going to steal yours, Julie, so I can read this properly. Think about an experience when you were working in an excellent, well-functioning team or organization. And I want you to describe that to your partner. Your partner will take notes. What really stands out for you? What were the main? Describe what factors made this organization so effective or successful. So apply that to a specific situation. And then number two, the opposite, the flip side. So we're going to look at what was dysfunctional in a situation you worked with in the past that was really, really bad, and what was that like? What stood out for you there? All right? And then we're going to see how that hangs on the model that we'll be discussing today. So please find yourself a partner. We're going to do this about 5 minutes each, all right? So please stay focused. You feel free to move around if you want to. Question?
I'm actually taking notes on it.
Yes.
I'm not taking notes on this.
No. You're going to take notes on your partner, ask your partner the questions, and write down their answers, okay? So they can speak freely and you'll take their notes, all right? All right, let's go ahead. All right, everybody, we're going to reconvene, and I'd like to hear a little bit about what you discovered in your discussions. Because this is a great way at getting at, starting to really tap into what factors we need to be paying attention to be very effective in our organizations. So, All right, and if you didn't get all the way through the negative stuff, that's okay. That's all right, because we really wanted to focus on the positive, but I just wanted you to contrast or bring some awareness to what some of the barriers can be as well. So I'd like to hear from you. If you could just kind of throw out some of the main factors that bubbled up in your discussion as being the ones that contributed to optimal situations, teams, organizations, and the dysfunctional ones. Please.
For about 10 years, I belonged to a national organization called the Thomas Paine National Historical Association, which has offices in New Rochelle, New York. And I was on the board. And the thing that was optimal, that was so amazing, is that the number of people who had a passion for promoting Thomas Paine and his time. And so they were passionate about the mission. Absolutely unbelievable. It was exciting to be around people that were so excited about promoting one of our great heroes of that particular time in history.
Excellent.
The dysfunctional part is that we had one of the members of the board that was a nationally known historian about Thomas Paine. And he sort of felt he was the society. And so we had constant problems with his attitude about he knew more about Thomas Paine than anybody in the world.
So kind of dominance, or what's the other word?
Very dominant. Controlling.
Controlling, okay. Thank you. Other factors, and even if you just want to shout them out, I'll paraphrase them for you. So just like tell me like the main factors that bubbled up.
Team building.
Okay, I heard team building. What about you? You back? What's that? Oh, okay. So team building made it optimal. My markers are getting tired. Team building made it optimal.
Quality of the team allowed a higher level of expression, and it was more enjoyable, it was more fun, and there was respect for people on the team, and everyone had a passion and a purpose, and they were all willing to go above and beyond because they had a common investment, and there was excitement on the team for their mission. They all shared the same purpose and values.
I hope I got most of those. I wrote as quick as I could. Let me know if I missed anything.
Everybody knows their roles.
Everyone knows their roles, so clarity about roles. This isn't a problem on boards, is it? It's a common one. What else? What else was optimal or dysfunctional? We're just going to populate this with some of your thoughts and ideas.
Creative freedom. Freedom to be creative.
Okay.
Freedom to express, have open dialogue.
Freedom for that. Okay. Thank you.
Micromanaging of others leads to no trust, loss of faith in a leader because of lack of follow-through, saying yes, doing nothing, going through the motions. Those are all, yeah, dysfunctional.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, one optimal one was not mixing job duties within one position. So if you're a fundraiser, you do fundraising. You're not also doing case management or other duties that take you away from that.
Okay. Jobs. Thank you. Any others that really jumped out that were different than the ones we've seen so far?
Well, we were talking about going into something you're going to have differences.
Mm-hmm.
So conflict resolution through respect and consensus. But then on the other side that goes into total dysfunctional things is when a board member is given a job description and then it becomes implied authority, where she's definitely representing the organization in such a negative spin that it starts to just, really unravel the organization. And if it's in a women's group, women tend to be very polite, especially women in my generation and older, and don't tend to want to do problem resolution. They just let it go.
We don't want to get into that conflict piece.
Not
yeah.
going there.
It's very uncomfortable for many. Anything else that stood out that's very different than what we've heard so far?
We came up with communication, good communication being optimal, and of course, the flip side of that, poor communication becoming dysfunctional for a group.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Anything else that stood out? Stephen? You're going to get your exercise today, Whitney. Thank you.
How about pitting one group against another, like for instance, the board against the managing staff? And you could probably add fear on there as well.
Fear, yeah. Fear does not bring out the best in us usually, unless we're in an emergency situation.
I have two to add that are not on there. One is backside communication.
Backside?
Yeah, like a couple board members communicating but not sharing it with the full board. Any concerns or ideas? And that second one would be the board leader taking all the control and the other board members giving up voice and control.
Bless you. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, Cindy.
So we talked about from a large organization to a small organization that coming to the table, the respect and trust that when everybody's there for the mission, those staff meetings or team meetings are not only they're working toward the mission, but they're also helping each other, supporting each other, where, like Sarah was talking about, sometimes they'll share interdepartmentally staff. If that's what's going to help the organization work the best, then everybody's in for the mission.
Okay. So commitment, it's like teamwork, right? Is that what you mean? Commitment and teamwork? Thank you. Was there anything else that stood out that we haven't captured? Yes, Ramona.
To make them work optimally, having the ground rules set and then not having them makes it dysfunctional. And then having in a team setting or for teamwork agendas and following them so you don't go off topic. And when you don't have them, it really makes the team dysfunctional.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Anything else that we haven't that's very different, Bob?
What was reported was lack of leadership. This is on the dysfunctional side, of course.
Okay. I'm going to switch colors. I was trying to stick with the black, but I'm going to switch colors. That's better. And what else?
Lack of trust.
Yep, no trust.
Lack of structure.
So with regard to agenda or
The
roles?
structure of the organization.
Okay.
And in fact, not even understanding what the organization was all about before they joined the board. Which probably presumes a lack of a process to be on the board.
So poor infrastructure for onboarding. Poor process. On boarding. Okay.
Lack of spirit, lack of commitment, lack of purpose. Passion for sure. Purpose, I think, is a big word.
Yeah.
And which led to the demise of this whole board. When this one individual joined the board for a year, at the end of the year, everybody had left. And bringing new people on and falling into the same rat hole, and the organization just doesn't do well at all because of these lack of quality ingredients.
Absolutely. It's amazing how even one negative leader can tear down an organization. I've seen it happen many times.
A lot of the problem, I think, is when you get a negative leader or even a couple negative board members, you have a pollutant factor. You have a culture that goes the wrong direction, and that culture then permeates most of the board and makes it totally dysfunctional. And it doesn't take a whole lot of people to bring down a board in that way.
Yeah. And it's tough. And then if you don't have a process in place to deal with those, usually a process helps because then you can fall back on it and say, hey, this is how we deal with it. It helps.
And there was also cherry picking of the bylaws. What is convenient, what works for us, what doesn't work with this, we will ignore. And I'm going to assume that terms probably were not in that, and probably ridding the organization of a bad board member probably wasn't identified in that bylaws, in those bylaws anyway.
Absolutely.
So there wasn't a structure, there wasn't a mechanism or a safety valve to clean it up.
Absolutely.
And so it was a sick board.
Yeah.
And the organization suffered because the concept, the philosophy, the mission of this particular organization is phenomenal. And it's just too bad that this particular chapter isn't making it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's this stuff you would think is not rocket science, but so commonly organizations and boards fall into the pitfalls. Well, pitfalls we're seeing here on the dysfunctional side and what you're describing, Bob, about lack of strong infrastructure, toxic elements being allowed to fester. It's unfortunately all too common. Yes, you had another comment?
I think I would add also like a good old boys club.
Oh.
Good old girls club.
Oh, yes.
So it's exclusive rather than inclusive?
Yes, I'm dealing with that right now, the situation. Yes. Yeah, that's not very helpful, is it? Yeah, I wonder why. All right, so thank you. So what I'd like to do next, thank you for doing that, taking some time to reflect. And do keep that, like I mentioned before, that interview form. If you want, you can switch back with your partner, or at least remember the things that came up for you, especially in the successful example, because those things will really tie into, especially if you're in a transition point in your life, those can be really just things that are important to you to look for in future opportunities. And if you are embedded in your organization, is something for you to look to as to things you want to grow to help you feel like you're flourishing and fully functioning in your organization. So I try to always think of other positive ways you can use the exercises that we're looking at together. So what I'd like to do next is now turn our attention to and kind of cross-reference this over to this model that we looked at earlier. Now, this looks kind of blurry to me. Is it just my eyesight? It does look blurry? Okay. And I'm going to ask you please to help with that because it's up high. But you do have it, you have the same information but in the form of a worksheet as well. So you can refer to that as well. And I made it into a worksheet because we're going to use that to do our own assessments. Thank you so much. All right, so this we looked at briefly earlier, and I'm going to give you a little background to where this came from and different ways we can apply this information. So when I was as an internal consultant way back in the late 90s with the internal consulting team, and I was in a municipal government organization, we developed this based on management research. And so, based on business intelligence and good information, we looked at the factors, cross-referenced a number of different pieces to figure out what are the most important elements to make a successful organization. And there are probably others to add here too, and that's why you'll see some other blanks at the bottom as well, because there are some things that are very unique to some of your organizations that might be particularly important to highlight that wouldn't be more general in sense here. But I've been using this for a long time to help people think globally about what's most important. This morning we commented on the fact that most organizations spend most of their focus, attention, and energy here, and oftentimes not enough here or here. And this model reminds us that there are three main categories. There are many ways to break this down, and many different models of showing this, but I like this because I can remember these three. Three main areas that we must pay attention to in order to be successful in our organizations. Now I'm going to do a little offshoot of this before I get into the detailed elements, and I just want to invite you to think about where you should be spending your most of your time, or if you had to split 100% of your time across these three categories, what would it look like the higher up in leadership you are in an organization? So say you're on a board, or a board officer, or an executive director. Let's take that example together, and let's just consider what percentage of your time do you think you would be spending, or would be optimal to be spending in each of those three categories? What do you think? Does anybody want to shout out some numbers?
I'd say equal.
Equal? So equal is one option? Okay. Anybody have any different ideas about what would be the right proportions across the three?
I would say, given the question,
Mm-hmm.
was
What percentage proportion of your time should you be spending in each of those three as a in a high leadership position in an organization?
I would say you would spend most of your time in three, and if you're higher up on the board.
Most of your percentage in three, so the one on the far right? Okay. Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't hear what your comment. Sorry? Oh, okay. Are we short on
So you're
copy?
talking about the three as listed there on top, the three columns?
Yes.
Okay.
So the three categories, yeah, I'm calling them
Gotcha.
three
Okay,
categories.
gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts on where you should be spending most of your time? Or how you should be splitting your time? Well, in a general sense, I see people getting in trouble when they're in leadership positions, when they're spending too much of their time here, the higher up they get, and not enough time, in the middle, and not enough time on the two sides. And these two sides are so important to having your organization function well, yet we often neglect them. So the main point here is to think about, depending on where you are in your organization, what do you think is the most appropriate percentage of time to spend in those three categories? Because the people who are doing the frontline work and the other staff members in an organization are probably, depending on what their role is, of course, going to be more focused on this. So typically it falls to the leadership to really ensure that these things are happening and these things are happening. So let's dig into those things a little bit, but I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on what proportion of our time we should be focusing in those three areas. So when it comes to productive, satisfied employees, and I know we talked a little bit about it this morning as well in a different context. Research shows us without a doubt that if you are not satisfied, and employees, I mean board as well, all leadership positions and volunteers, if you are not satisfied, your productivity is greatly limited. You cannot give your full amount if you are not feeling satisfied and taken care of. And what that means is a combination of those elements below. So things that are really, really important: fair treatment, respect for diversity. We saw that over here, didn't we? Clear organizational direction and clear expectations. So the direction of the organization, roles and expectations kind of all fall in there. Empowerment. So the opposite of being micromanaged. How many of you have worked under a micromanager before? Oh, I couldn't wait to run. I think I lasted 2 or 3 months. I couldn't stand it. Yeah, it's so, yeah. It doesn't bring out, it limits us so much. Meaningful work. I hope that that is a given for many of you, but sometimes we need to help reinforce that. And what we talked about this morning about being able to demonstrate the impact of our work can contribute to this as well. Challenge. To bring out the most of our employees, we need to make sure they are continually challenged. In terms of our board members, it's even continuing to make sure that they're having truly generative discussions in board meetings and not just reviewing minutes and reports and financials, and those are important too, but making space. There are different ways to deal with that, including consent agendas, some of that, but making space for truly generative thinking where they can bring their best thinking, their talents that they came to the board with, and really contribute those in an ongoing way that's meaningful to them. Reward and recognition. This is different for everybody, isn't it? It's important to take the time to make sure you understand what is rewarding or how people like to be recognized, because it does vary depending on your personality. So looking at this is really important. Effective physical workspace and tools. Computers that work well and are updated. A healthy work environment. Again, this might vary based on the person as well. This next one, opportunities for input, is huge. Huge, absolutely huge. And not just input, but feeling like your input matters to others. So we're gonna kind of look at all these together here, and then in a little while we'll have an opportunity to self-assess. Can anyone think of anything that's really relevant to them that's not on this list that you might want to add for yourself on your worksheet? And if so, feel free to fill it in. Now, does somebody need another copy? Because I had one that I stole that I was highlighting some things on, but I can give this one up. I don't need it. Is anyone missing a copy, or are we good now? Okay. This is good. Many more people came than we expected today, so this is good. All right. All right, let me share this with you right now, and it's related to this piece here that we're talking about, the satisfied, productive employees. Neuroscientific research has told us what we probably already know, and it overlaps with this, but I wanted to share this with you because I think it's really, really important. So most of you have probably studied the brain at some point to know there are different parts of our brain. We have the more primitive parts of our brain, and then we have the parts of our brain that contribute to higher level thinking, the highest level thinking that we as humans can do. And there are certain factors that need to be in place in order for us to really tap into that higher level thinking of our brains. And those three things, there are three main factors there that research has shown, and those are an environment of safety, mattering, and belonging. This is not in your handout, but I just wanted to share it because I think this is really cool. This is based on neuroscientific research in this area. And again, we probably intuitively knew this, right? But there's research to show that the brain doesn't work properly unless those factors, properly as in the highest level, which is where we want our employees, right? If we want to get the most out of them, or our internal people, or our board members and our volunteers. without those. So safety, that's like that respectful environment, right? The respect, the trust. Yes, that my dignity will be withheld in this environment. Mattering is about opportunities for input, and that your input matters and will be taken seriously, okay? And belonging is about having opportunities to build camaraderie in your team as well. So that is another piece, and it's not directly called out here. It's maybe embedded in some of these, but if you think that's important, you could add that at the bottom if you wanted to. That's important for boards. That's important for all organizations, because when you have those opportunities for belonging or camaraderie, that's where the bonding occurs. That's where the relationships are formed that are crucial to doing all the other work. So just wanted to share that with you. So this is a very, very important element. And every week I hear of examples of leaders who do not appreciate this, who are treating people terribly, who are not creating environments with safety, mattering, and belonging, and just being absolutely toxic and losing people, and of course to the detriment of the impact that they're trying to make in the organization. So it's so, so, so important. And if you come into an organization and you get the sense that the leader does not appreciate this and you're not the leader, it might be a good sign of what you might want to do, because it's very, very destructive. All right. So that's that piece. And the higher you are in leadership, the more attention you need to be giving there. I'm going to go to the far right. Ethical, effective management practices, making sure you're doing your strategic planning. Performance or outcome evaluation, which ties into the business intelligence organization. Sorry, it's old habit. The intelligence discussion that we had today. Process improvement, looking at how to streamline things or make them as customer or internally friendly as possible. There's things to look at. Having sound financial practices, innovative use of technology, trying to keep up with technology, which I know is hard on a limited budget, but this is part of what your board is for, right? To help you figure out the resources, because that links directly to the tools you need to do your work so that you can be optimally productive. Organizational improvement activities, so other kinds of improvement activities like, let me see. It could be surveying, gathering information, those kinds of things to figure out how you're doing so you can continually improve yourself. Commitment to ethics. You want to have respect for your leadership.
What is CQI?
CQI is continuous quality improvement. Sorry. Yep. Commitment to ethics. Sustainability is one that I've added, and there are two aspects. In recent years I've added this, and there are two main aspects to this. One is environmental stewardship through the practices you have in your organization. So that does not mean changing your mission. It just means sourcing and disposing of your supplies and whatnot responsibly. And that can have a benefit in terms of the culture you're creating in the organization and how you're perceived outwardly. And sustainability also means, it's a combination of other things like the financial practices and all the other things that you think about to make sure your organization is sustainable over the long term. Okay. So, any questions on this before we start to look at how we're doing in our organizations with regard to these things? All right. Would you like to take a quick break now because we're about halfway through? Should we take our quick, are you used to a 5-minute break or a longer break?
It varies with each.
Okay. 6-minute break? That could be negotiated. All right, everyone, let's take 6 minutes, and then we'll come back. And if you get back sooner than that, just start looking at your worksheet, because we're going to work through that individually to identify where we are on a scale of 1 to 10 on those items. All right, let's start looking at this together, and others can catch up as they come on in, because they'll catch. We're just going to reflect on these lists for a minute here. It's been more than 6 minutes. No. All right. So is there anything on our optimal list that you don't see represented somehow or potentially embedded in the model over here? Stephen?
I don't know if it would fall under meaningful work, passion and exciting work.
Passionate and exciting work. I think it's meant to be under meaningful work, but it's not highlighted as such. So if it's useful to you, I invite you to add the words that you think would make your model, the joy of the work, yeah. So I think it's supposed to be under meaningful, but it may not come through as strongly as it should. So feel free to add that. Thank you. What else? Was there anything else on this list? So we're just reflecting on what we came up through with our exercise to see if we need to fill in any gaps, see how well the two overlay.
I don't really see anything in there about fun.
But, well, work's not fun. I'm just kidding.
I mean, you know,
I'm just
that
kidding.
It's not always just so serious, but there.
Yeah.
And that might be
Yeah.
under like the team building.
Fun. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. I like to weave that into my ground rules, that fun piece, but it's not necessarily up there in itself. Maybe it's hope that you're having fun if you're doing all those things, but we shouldn't assume that. So I like that. Yes, absolutely fun. Is there anything else you're noticing? Well, on Julie's comment, the piece that I'm thinking about as we're having a conversation now, because these are works in progress and they evolve over time, as we learn, is that belonging piece. It relates to the fun piece, and the fun is really where that bonding occurs. And it's really a piece of team building too. So I would encourage you, if it's useful to you, that you could add that onto it under one of your others. And again, this is your reference document to use to be as useful as possible for you. So feel free to add to it as you see fit. All right, we did not go specifically over the middle section here, but I think these are pretty self-explanatory. This opportunities for input I'll highlight for a moment, I think is really about reaching out to get feedback from the people, from those who you serve or other key stakeholders. So you might want to expand, if it makes sense for your organization, the thinking of from just clients or customers to other key stakeholder groups. For example, if you run an animal shelter, you're probably not going to survey your animals. I don't think. I'm not sure how to do that. You would stump me on that one. Although you could probably tell from their body language if they're happy. Right? Maybe animal experts could come in and look at them and see if they seem to be happy. But anyways, feel free to, if it makes sense for you, to broaden your perception of stakeholder. And when I use the word stakeholder, I'm going to say external stakeholder in this sense, because your internal stakeholders are over here on the left side. And when I define stakeholders, anybody who influences your success, your organization's success in producing the impact and carrying out your mission, anyone who influences your success or is affected by the work you do. So it's a very broad definition. Okay. What I'd like to do now is invite you to take your worksheet and just do a quick assessment of where you think your organization, and if you want to think of it from your board, a board role, an employee role, an organization you worked at before, whatever is relevant to you right now, and just do a quick rating in those blanks on a scale of 1 to 10. How well do you think you're functioning in each one of these areas? And then we're going to do some prioritization to figure out what you might want to be really focusing on in the upcoming months. So 10 being excellent, exceptional functioning, 1 being absolutely terrible. Just go down quickly, and then I'd like you just to do an average score at the bottom for each column as well, which would just be, of course, counting up the number that you ended up with, the number of elements, and then dividing, or totaling up and then dividing by the number. Okay, let's go ahead and take some time to do that. How many of you had the highest average score on satisfied customers? The satisfied customers score. Okay, for your organizational effectiveness. Okay. How many of you had the highest average score on ethical and effective management practices? How many of you the highest average score on productive, satisfied employees? Okay. What about the rest of you? Did you calculate? Did you get to calculating the average scores? Basically, it's just a sense for where are you strongest in those 3 columns. What do you think? Well, hopefully you have. If you haven't calculated those scores yet, you're looking at them. But what I'd like you to do, I mean, that's one sense of kind of looking at the broad category, how are we doing in comparison? That's a broad sense of looking at with our organizational effectiveness, where do we really need to give more attention? And for what we're going to do next, I'm going to encourage you to take the 5 or 6 or 7, just kind of the ones that really seem to need the most work, and we're going to plot them in a prioritization matrix in a moment to kind of give you a sense for which ones would be most important for you to look at in your organization for actually making a plan to address, to move forward, to apply this in your organizations to be more effective. So one thing I'd like you to pause and think about before we translate these to the matrix that hopefully you have a copy of. It was on the table. You have a copy of the matrix, the squares, the 4 squares? Okay, good. This is where I wanted to pull in that strategic plan model that many of us saw this morning as well. Because part of your prioritization might depend on what you have in your strategic plan. If you have a strategic plan in your organization, you might want to reflect on, all right, what are some of the main elements in this? And I know for the description of this class, I encourage you to bring some of that if you have it, so you can use it for context. But even if you don't have it in front of you, just try to think of what are some of the main directions in your strategic plan, because what you're trying to accomplish in your strategic plan might drive which of those factors you prioritize to focus on today, to really give attention to. So what we're going to do is choose our priorities, and then for the top 2 or 3, I'll actually have an action planning worksheet for you to fill out to start thinking about what you're going, the steps that you are going to commit to taking to improve in those areas, to improve your organizational effectiveness. So reflect on the strategic plan model. You might have a copy of it already, because I know this one's kind of small to look at in your PowerPoint handouts. And then what I'd like you to do is take the ones that you feel need the most attention from your personal assessment and plot them on your 4-square matrix. So if I could have figured out how to do it properly, it ended up, I was playing with this and I couldn't get one of my axes to work properly. But basically what we're looking at on the bottom, along the bottom, is the axis of resources, low resources, high resources. So if you wanted to, you could draw in an arrow with the word resources underneath it. And up this way, we're looking at the axis of impact. So you could draw an arrow pointing upwards, low impact, high impact. And what I'd like you to do is on your assessment sheet that you just filled out your scores, somehow flag the ones you think need the most attention. Again, I'm suggesting 5, 6, 7. But do what's relevant for you. And I'd like you to plot them on your prioritization matrix. Does that make sense? So that you can start to prioritize, because we can't do necessarily 7 things at the same time, but we can start to identify the ones that are going to be most important. So I would suggest once you do your plotting, the ones that end up in your, if you have any that end up in this quadrant over here, high impact, low resources, that's where I would look first. But again, your strategic plan might be kind of a mitigating factor in helping you decide where things should fall on your matrix. Does that make sense? So your strategic plan, if you have a strategic plan, that's defining what's most important for the organization to achieve the vision that you're working toward right now, collectively in your organization. So if there are items on that, if there are items on the assessment that you were fairly low on that could relate directly to what you're trying to achieve in your strategic plan right now, that might help you prioritize those as most important to be working on right now. And that might even supersede where they would fall here. But if you don't have your strategic plan as context, you can just go straight to this and figure out which of those elements are most impactful, most important to your organization right now. So go ahead and translate the ones that you think are lowest and need the most attention onto the prioritization matrix, so then we can determine which ones you want to identify action plans for. All right, so my hope is that in thinking through these pieces and looking at the assessment and applying it to the prioritization models, you can start to identify opportunities where you could put in some effort that could make some big impact for your organization. What were some things, does anybody care to share, what were some things that really came to the top, floated to the top when you did this exercise? What were some opportunities that you identified that really came to the top?
One that would be a higher impact and lower resources is just making people feel more empowered to do their job.
Okay, so making people feel more empowered to do their work. Low resource, high impact. Absolutely. Some of it is just what you're doing intentionally and how you treat people and refocusing on that. Yeah, awesome. That's a great example. Empowerment is huge, huge. Anyone else like to share what you found was most important for you, given this process, to help bring more effectiveness to your organization?
I think for me, it was just how many things are very interlinked and close together. So if we work on one, we're covering some of the others at the same time.
Which is a great thing, right?
Yeah.
You can address many. So that was a great insight for you, because that it wasn't so overwhelming, hopefully, once you saw that many of them were clustered and that they would all take care of each other. Thank you for that. Bob?
I want to remind people in your class, something to say, we need to get our advice and get on tape, or it's just going to be
Okay, all right. So try to keep on the mics, and I'll try to paraphrase a little bit too, but yes,
Try to
thank you.
run faster.
Anyone else want to share what came to the top for you? What rose to the top? No. Yes.
Well, I came in knowing one thing, taking over a foundation and wanting to be forward-thinking and hearing that the board members really want to resign and I have to build a new board and I need a treasurer and those types of things. So it really is right now high-impact decisions. So I just kind of went through 3 of my main goals right now. Besides replacing the board. But sound financial practices is top. Sustainability for a foundation to have that happening, and then putting together some organizational improvement activities. So to me, that was just really, I think it's going to have high impact and hopefully bring in high resources. And getting that set from the beginning, the get-go, to just build that board with these 3 things.
Yeah.
Is big. So anyone interested who loves libraries, if you know anyone who loves libraries.
Yeah. I thank you for those insights. And one thing that reminded me of is sometimes it's so important in our nonprofits to step back, maybe step back from our impact a little bit even, from our cause, and build the infrastructure so that we can be so much more powerful in delivering that impact toward our cause. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important piece. Thank you. KJ.
We are in the process of building an endowment, which is high impact, high resource. Just something to share.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gosh, that seems to be a trend these days. A lot of people are working on endowments, and it's not easy. But I've heard of someone who's really good at helping with the strategies on endowments. So if you're interested in that, just get a hold of me later, and I can share that. Anyone else want to share what floated to the top for you? Thank you. All right. All right. What I'd like to do next is give you a chance to translate this into an action plan so you have a concrete piece to take back to the office, since we're taking the time and space to do this and you're not in the office fighting fires and doing all the other things you need to do in the office. And think for a little bit about what you're going to do specifically to start to address this. So take it to the next level rather than just sound financial practices. I know that's important. I'll try to remember that when I get back to the office. Try to piece it out in some chunks that you can start working on in the next month or two. This isn't even a long-term plan. The tool I'm going to share with you is an action planning template that I use in strategic planning, so you'll see reference to goal and strategy. And I decided to leave it in there in case there is reference to your strategic plan here, and you want to make a reference thereby. But you don't have to. It's not important that you do that if it's not relevant to you. What's most important to me is that you pick those high impact, high or low resource, depending on what you think is most needed right now, and start to outline some steps that you want to take, and we'll share with your respective board or employees to improve those areas of effectiveness in your organization. So I'm going to pass this tool out for you. If you want to do more than one today, I've got plenty of them, so please let me know. Let me just say, who's that? That's the template. There we go. And I gave you two by accident. You're welcome. So this is your next step in the exercise, and this is a piece that you can take back with you. And after this, we'll talk about some keys to success. Yes, thank you. We'll talk about some keys to success that go beyond what we've been talking about so far. You're welcome. There you go. Thanks. You'll notice on this template at the bottom, there are three little boxes that I think are really useful when you're doing action planning, to kind of really think through the reality of what it would take to address the issues that you have chosen. So you got yours over there. Okay. All right, so just take a few minutes, and then I just want to make the space for you to then go ahead and apply some action planning to what's most important to you. So what are some of the first steps you would take to address the areas that you found most important? I know some of you worked through some more elaborate planning there, and some of you may want to take some time to think about it or take it back to your staff or others that you work with and share some of it as well. So in whatever way the tools serve you, I encourage you to use them that way. And if you'd like any of these tools electronically, please reach out to me. Just let me know. I'm happy to share. If I'm sharing a hard copy, I'm going to share an electronic copy with you so that it can be useful to you. I'm very happy to share that with you. So, all right. So with that all done and said and considered and reflected on, I'm trying to find my clicker. I left it somewhere, but we can do this the old-fashioned way. So we've done some planning. We did the action planning, looking at execution within the next couple months. This is not a strategic plan. This is a short-term boost to your organizational effectiveness. We shared some of the areas that we were working on, so I think we're good there. And what I'd like to do next is kind of look at another. I'm going to see if I have time to share kind of two more ways of looking at this with you, to give you some more food for thought as you look at optimizing the effectiveness of your organization. So, especially when you implement some kind of organizational improvement activity, a strategic plan, or some kind of major change in your organization, there seem to be three main things that you need to focus on to make sure that all this time and effort is worthwhile and successful. You can have the right people in the room, you can come up with the best possible solutions in your organization, but sometimes still things fall flat. And why? So what I try to do with this 3 keys slide is to really get us thinking about probably what I think are the 3 most critical things to ensuring that any kind of change or improvement effort happens to further support your effectiveness in the organization. So number 1 is maximize human dynamics. We've talked quite a bit throughout the day, this morning and this afternoon, but probably more this morning about the impact of us being human on we've looked at this carefully, and this is how this time is going to be different. And lay it out. We have an action plan now, and we're going to move things forward according to that. Where we've identified things in our strategic plan, that will support our strategic plan, and here's how we're going to assign things to make sure that things happen more effectively. So do that. That's really important. Another thing you can do that relates to human dynamics is leveraging your organizational effectiveness activities. So if you're doing things to improve, to boost productive, satisfied employees, let people know that that's what you're doing, and also tie it back to other things like a survey or something like that. This is what we learned, and now these are the steps we're taking. I think that's really important to tie a loop on that. Another thing you can do with Keys to Success here is if you're doing some improvement efforts that matter to other stakeholders, let them know, because that again will improve your credibility in the communities, the likelihood of that people will engage with you in the most effective ways. So think about psychology, think about human dynamics, and how you can utilize your organizational effectiveness activities to gain support and moving forward. Reinforce leadership support. Make sure your leaders understand the importance of whatever organizational development you're doing, and they not only understand, but they're walking the talk. That's really, really important. And ensuring relentless follow-up. So again, we've talked about that, but that is the number one place where all of this effort falls apart, is that relentless follow-up. So make sure that once you're committed to something, you're carrying out those action plans, you're moving forward, you're checking on them, you're communicating your successes and your challenges, and you're moving forward that way. So those are the 3 keys to success to keep in mind in any kind of organizational development effort. Now, we've talked about a lot of things today. We've talked about what contributed to optimal functioning in organizations and dysfunctional situations. We've talked about the QPO model. We ranked our organizations or our situations or our board positions or whatever was relevant to us with regard to that QPO model. We also did some prioritization of those items and then took that into some action planning. And there's one other piece of research that I want to share with you really quickly before we wrap up, because we have just a minute. And I just came across it recently, and it's food for thought for you to take away with you. So it relates to a lot of the things we discovered over here, especially on the dysfunctional side, and it relates to leadership. So you've probably all heard some version of vertical leadership and horizontal leadership. So vertical leadership is top-down, power. A lot of these things here reminded me of this piece. The leader taking control, having all the information, dominance, controlling, micromanaging, creates a situation where there's not a lot of trust, those kinds of things. So that's kind of vertical. Those are the vertical leadership situations that I want to refer to. And then there's horizontal leadership. And another name for leaders who are horizontal leaders are multiplying leaders. They're multipliers. They're creating more energy, more productivity, that kind of thing. I wanted to give you an overview of this, and I want to share some research that I found really compelling. I can't remember the name of the researcher, so I'll have to look this up. So if you want the reference, I will come back to it, or just contact me later. But basically, the research was done of employees who work for both kinds of leaders. And the question they asked the employees was, how engaged are you? How much are you giving at the workplace? Up to 100%. In the vertical situation, 48% is the average score. People were working at 48% productivity is another way of saying it. Horizontal situation, the average score was 98%. People were giving 98%. So there's a huge business case there, and that's really, really impactful when it comes to having productive, satisfied employees. So I wanted to share that with you because it ties into that admin model. All right. Any questions of what we've talked about today? We're almost at the end. I would encourage you to, again, fill out insights that that came to you today. Here are some resources: boardsource.org, blueavocado.org, the
on what we talked about today. So for example, if you identified some areas on your organizational effectiveness model that you want to carry forth in an action plan, some resources like sample board descriptions or bylaws or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of excellent resources in these two websites if you haven't already tapped into them. So I want to share those with you. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please let me know. But before we close, does anybody have any insights or questions you want to share before we're done for the day? Well, I hope I will give you some new ideas, suggest some new things for you that you can take back with you. And I just want to thank you for being here.